I've been tending to the departed for 37 years now. The locals call me Old Morris, though my Christian name is Elijah. I've seen enough of this cemetery's secrets to fill 100 volumes, but what occurred on that autumn night in '84 still chills me to the marrow of my aging bones. The cemetery I watch over sits on the outskirts of Millhaven, nestled between sloping hills that catch the morning fog like cupped hands. I've always found a peculiar comfort in my profession. The departed don't judge, don't complain, and certainly don't cause trouble. At least, that's what I believed until September 14, 1984. The evening began like any other. I locked the main gates at sunset, lit my kerosene lamp, and began my first patrol of the grounds. The moon hung low and full, casting long shadows across the tombstones. A light mist had settled, obscuring the distant corners of the property. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, the soft hooting of an owl, the distant hum of cars on the highway, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. I had just passed the old mausoleum when I heard it, a soft, scraping sound, like nails dragging across packed soil. I froze, lifting my lamp higher. "Hello!" I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the silence. "Someone there?" No response came, but the scraping continued. Following the sound, I made my way toward the newer section of the cemetery, where we'd conducted a funeral just 2 days prior. A young woman, not more than 30, taken by illness. The family had been devastated. I recalled how her husband had to be practically carried away from the gravesite, unwilling to leave her. As I approached row 7, plot 16, my blood turned to ice water in my veins. There, illuminated by my trembling lamp, was an open grave, the very same we had filled just 48 hours earlier. But that wasn't what stopped my heart. The casket, a beautiful cherrywood piece with brass fixtures, sat perfectly centered on the path, 5 feet away from its rightful resting place. The lid was closed. No tools were visible. No footprints marked the damp soil aside from my own. "Good Lord above," I whispered, crossing myself instinctively. I approached cautiously, half expecting something, though I couldn't say what. The casket appeared undisturbed, as if it had been carefully placed there by funeral directors rather than dragged from 6 feet below by some unimaginable force. With shaking hands, I reached for my radio to call the authorities. Officer Callahan answered, his voice crackling through the static. "Morris, what's wrong?" "You'd better come quick," I managed to say. "Bring backup. Something's happened at the Richardson plot." While waiting, I stood guard over that casket, though every instinct screamed at me to run. 30 minutes felt like years. I didn't dare touch it or move closer than necessary. The night had grown unnaturally still. No insects chirping, no breeze rustling the trees. Just silence and that casket, sitting there like a dark promise. Finally, headlights cut through the fog as 2 patrol cars pulled up to the cemetery gates. Officer Callahan and Deputy Martinez approached, flashlights scanning the area. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Callahan whispered when he saw it. "How did this happen?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Found it like this during my rounds." Martinez circled the grave. "That's at least 6 feet of dirt that needed moving. No way this is kids or vandals." Callahan radioed for forensics while Martinez took photographs. They checked for footprints, tool marks, anything that might explain how someone exhumed a casket without leaving a trace of their presence. "We should check if..." Martinez began, gesturing to the casket. Neither of them wanted to say it, but we all knew what needed to be done. With reluctance, I produced my master key for the cemetery locks. Many families opt for small locks on caskets, a final, symbolic protection for their loved ones. With trembling hands, I approached the casket. The brass lock seemed untouched. I inserted the key, and with a soft click, it opened. Callahan stepped forward, his hand on his holster. "On three," he said. "1, 2, 3. Together, we lifted the heavy lid. The interior was pristine, white satin lining, plush cushioning, the small pillow still bearing the indentation of where Mrs. Richardson's head had rested. But Mrs. Richardson herself was gone. "This is impossible," Martinez whispered. Callahan immediately called for additional units. Within the hour, the cemetery was crawling with officers, forensic technicians, and even the county coroner. As dawn broke, we had found nothing. No trace of the missing woman, no explanation for the casket's movement, not a single clue. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The strangest part, when we examined the grave, there was no evidence it had been disturbed from above. The soil at the bottom showed signs of disruption, as if something had pushed upward from below. The case file would eventually grow thick with witness statements and forensic reports, yet provide no answers. But what the official record doesn't contain, what I've never told another living soul until now, is what happened when I returned to lock up the cemetery the following evening. As I approached the Richardson plot, now refilled and seemingly undisturbed, I noticed something glinting in the last rays of the setting sun. There, placed perfectly atop the fresh soil, was Mrs. Richardson's wedding ring, a ring I had personally witnessed being buried with her 2 days prior. And carved into the soft earth beside it, a message that made my heart nearly stop. "I am not finished." That night, as I sat in my watchman's cabin, the radio crackled to life with reports of a woman matching Mrs. Richardson's description seen walking along the highway, her burial dress soaked through, her eyes fixed forward as she moved with unnatural purpose toward her former home, where her widower now slept alone. I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling above the dial. Should I warn him of what was coming? Or was I simply losing my mind after decades among the departed? The clock struck midnight, and then I heard it. Soft footsteps on my cabin porch, followed by a gentle knock at the door. My heart hammered against my ribs as the knocking continued, soft yet insistent. The oil lamp on my desk flickered, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. I reached for the shotgun I kept beneath my cot, my fingers wrapping around the cold metal. "Who's there?" I called, my voice hardly more than a whisper. No answer came, only another series of gentle taps against the weathered wood. Rising slowly, I approached the door, each floorboard creaking beneath my weight. Through the small window, I could see only darkness. The porch light had gone out, though I distinctly remembered turning it on at dusk. With trembling hands, I unlatched the lock and pulled the door open just an inch. "Hello!" The autumn air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of freshly turned soil and lilies, the same flowers that had adorned Mrs. Richardson's casket. But no one stood on my porch. Instead, resting on the welcome mat was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age despite being crisp and new just hours ago when the police had filed their reports. I picked it up, glancing nervously into the darkness before shutting and bolting the door. Under the lamplight, I unfolded the note. The handwriting was elegant yet shaky, as if written by someone who hadn't held a pen in years. "What was taken must be returned. Follow the path of twisted you. Midnight tomorrow. Come alone." Sleep evaded me that night. I sat in my rocking chair until dawn, shotgun across my lap, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. When morning finally broke, I convinced myself the note was some cruel prank. Perhaps teenagers who had heard about the incident and sought to frighten the old cemetery caretaker. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as I went about my duties that day. The cemetery, usually a place of comfort for me, felt hostile. The statues seemed to follow my movements with their stone eyes. The wind carried whispers I couldn't quite make out. I debated calling Officer Callahan but decided against it. What would I tell him? That I received a cryptic note after hearing phantom knocks? That I smelled funeral flowers? He already looked at me with pity, an old man who'd spent too long among the departed. Instead, I searched the grounds for the path of twisted yew mentioned in the note. In the northwest corner of the cemetery stood a row of ancient yew trees, their trunks gnarled and twisted with age. They marked the border between the maintained grounds and the oldest section, what locals called the Forgotten Acre, where graves from the 1800s lay untended, many markers long since crumbled or sunk into the earth. As dusk approached, I found myself drawn back to the Richardson plot. The freshly packed soil remained undisturbed, but the wedding ring I'd seen the previous evening was gone. In its place lay a single white lily, impossibly fresh. I knelt to examine it when a voice behind me nearly stopped my heart. "Beautiful, isn't she?" I whirled around to find Mr. Richardson standing there, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. He looked terrible, unshaven, clothes rumpled as if slept in, eyes bloodshot from weeping or sleeplessness or both. "Mr. Richardson," I stammered, rising quickly. "I didn't hear you come in." "I didn't want to be heard," he replied, his voice hollow. "The police called me this morning. Told me about what happened." He gestured weakly toward the grave. "Is it true? She's gone." I nodded solemnly. "I'm so sorry, sir. We have no explanation for—" "But I do," he interrupted, his eyes suddenly focusing with frightening intensity. "She always said she'd come back to me. Always." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small photograph, their wedding day, both beaming with joy. "We made a pact, you see. Nothing would separate us. Not even this." A chill ran down my spine. "Mr. Richardson, perhaps you should go home and rest. The authorities are handling the investigation." He laughed then, a sound devoid of humor. "They won't find her. She's not finished. She told me so." My blood froze. The exact words from the message carved into the soil. "What do you mean, she told you?" I asked carefully. Richardson's gaze drifted over my shoulder, focusing on something I couldn't see. "She came to me last night, standing at the foot of our bed, dripping wet, still in her burial dress. Beautiful as the day we met." His voice softened. "She couldn't speak, but I heard her all the same. In here." He tapped his temple. What did she want?" His eyes snapped back to mine, suddenly clear and cold. "Justice." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing among the headstones. I considered following him but thought better of it. The man was clearly unraveling from grief. As I locked the cemetery gates that evening, a heavy fog rolled in, unusual for that time of year. The distant streetlights became hazy orbs in the mist, and sound seemed muffled, as if the fog absorbed them. Back in my cabin, I paced restlessly, checking my watch every few minutes as midnight approached. The rational part of my mind argued against following the note's instructions. What sane person would venture into an old cemetery at midnight based on a mysterious message? Yet something deeper, more primal, knew I had no choice. At 11:45, I donned my heavy coat, grabbed my lantern and shotgun, and stepped into the fog-shrouded night. The beam of my light barely penetrated the dense mist as I made my way to the row of twisted yews. The temperature had dropped dramatically. My breath formed clouds before me. As I approached the Forgotten Acre, the fog seemed to part, creating a visible path forward. My footsteps crunched on fallen leaves as I passed weathered tombstones, their inscriptions long since eroded by time and elements. The path led to the oldest section of the cemetery, where the prestigious founding families of Millhaven had been laid to rest generations ago. At its center stood a small mausoleum, its marble facade blackened with age, door secured by a rusted iron gate that hadn't been opened in decades. Except tonight, that gate stood ajar. As the church bell in town began to toll midnight, A faint glow emanated from within the mausoleum. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I approached, my lantern held high. "Hello," I called, my voice swallowed by the fog. "Is anyone there?" No response came, but the light inside pulsed once, as if in acknowledgement. Steeling myself, I pushed the gate wider and stepped inside. The interior was surprisingly clean, free from the cobwebs and debris I would have expected. 4 stone sarcophagi occupied the central chamber, the names of Millhaven's founding fathers engraved on their sides. But it was the back wall that drew my attention, or rather, what was no longer there. One of the burial niches had been opened, its stone cover leaning against the wall. Behind it yawned a dark passage that couldn't possibly exist, the mausoleum backed directly against a hillside. The light I'd seen came from deep within this impossible tunnel, a faint bluish glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. As I stared, transfixed, a figure emerged from the shadows beside me. Mrs. Richardson stood not 3 feet away, still wearing her burial dress, her skin pale but unblemished by decay. She looked exactly as she had during her funeral, peaceful and serene, except for her eyes. They were alert, aware, and fixed intently on me. My lantern crashed to the floor as my hands lost all strength. The flame extinguished, leaving only the otherworldly blue glow illuminating her face. "Mrs. Richardson," I managed to whisper. "You're—" She raised one finger to her lips in a silencing gesture, then pointed toward the passage. When she moved, she made no sound, her feet hovering just above the stone floor. Finding my voice, I asked, "What happened to you? What did this?" She opened her mouth to speak, but instead of words, water poured forth, splashing onto the marble floor. Her eyes grew desperate, pleading, as she again pointed to the passage. From deep within the tunnel came a sound, a rhythmic scratching, like multiple sets of nails dragging against stone, growing closer. Mrs. Richardson's expression turned to one of terror. She moved toward me with frightening speed, her cold hands grasping my shoulders. Her lips pressed against my ear, and though no sound came out, I somehow heard her words within my mind. "They're coming. They've always been here, beneath us. They take us, change us, use us. I escaped, but they want me back. They want all of us back." The scratching grew louder, accompanied now by a low, inhuman chittering. Mrs. Richardson's grip tightened painfully on my shoulders as the blue light from the tunnel intensified. "You must seal it," her voice echoed in my head. "Before they reach the surface. Before they take more of us." "Seal what?" I gasped. "I don't understand." "The gate. It's not the only one. There are 7 in Millhaven. All must be closed." A long, pale limb, too thin to be human, with too many joints, reached around the edge of the passage entrance, its skin translucent in the blue light. Mrs. Richardson suddenly shoved me backward, toward the mausoleum entrance. "Run. Tell them. The book in my husband's study, the one with the black cover. The answers are there. Go." As I stumbled toward the exit, I caught one final glimpse of her standing before the passage, arms outstretched as if to block whatever was emerging. Then the blue light flared blindingly bright, and a sound like 1,000 screams filled the mausoleum. I ran as I've never run before, through the fog-choked cemetery, past the twisted yews, not stopping until I reached my cabin. Slamming the door behind me, I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. It was only then, in the safety of my locked cabin, that I realized my coat sleeve was clutched in a death grip. Slowly uncurling my fingers, I found a small object in my palm, a tarnished silver key, ancient in design, with 7 notches and a symbol I didn't recognize etched into its head. As dawn broke, I sat at my desk, the key before me, wondering if I had lost my mind or if the world as I knew it had ended. Either way, I knew what I had to do next. Find Mr. Richardson. Find the book with the black cover. And discover what secrets lay beneath Millhaven Cemetery before whatever dwelled there found its way to the surface. But as I peered out my window at the cemetery grounds, now peaceful in the morning light, I saw something that chilled me to my core. 6 fresh mounds of disturbed earth where no grave should be, arranged in a perfect circle around the old mausoleum. And at the center of that circle stood Mr. Richardson, staring directly at my cabin, a black book clutched in his hands and a knowing smile on his face. I watched through my window as Mr. Richardson stood motionless among those 6 mounds of freshly disturbed earth. The morning light did nothing to soften the eerie tableau. After several minutes, he turned and walked with deliberate steps toward my cabin. My instinct was to bolt the door to hide, but some deeper part of me knew it was too late for that. Whatever dark tide had been unleashed, I was already caught in its current. A gentle knock came at my door. When I opened it, Richardson's appearance shocked me. Gone was the disheveled, grief-stricken widower of yesterday. The man who stood before me was composed, his eyes clear and bright with purpose. The black book was clutched tightly against his chest. "Good morning, Mr. Morris," he said pleasantly, as if we were meeting for coffee rather than standing in the aftermath of impossible events. "May I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly. What else could I do? He took a seat at my small table, placing the book before him. Its leather binding was cracked with age, the edges of its pages yellowed and brittle. No title adorned its spine or cover, only a symbol matching the one on the keys still clutched in my palm. "You've seen her," he stated, not a question but a confirmation. I nodded, finding my voice at last. "Last night, in the old mausoleum. And she gave you this." He reached out, palm upward, indicating I should hand over the key. "What is happening, Mr. Richardson?" I demanded, keeping the key firmly in my grip. "What was in that passage? What did your wife mean about gates?" A sad smile crossed his face. "Clara wasn't just my wife, Mr. Morris. She was the last guardian of the 7th gate, as was her mother before her, and her grandmother before that. A duty passed down through her family line for generations." He opened the black book, revealing pages filled with handwritten text in multiple languages, interspersed with disturbing diagrams and maps. One page showed a familiar site, our cemetery, but with 7 locations marked by the same strange symbol from the key. "Millhaven wasn't built here by accident," Richardson continued. "The settlers who founded this town knew what lay beneath the soil. They built their cemetery here to keep watch over the gates." "Gates to what?" I whispered, dreading the answer. His eyes met mine, unflinching. "To the space between spaces, where they dwell." "They?" "The hollow ones. Ancient beings who exist in the darkness between worlds. They've been trying to break through for centuries." He ran his finger across the cemetery map. "These 7 points form a perfect containment circle. Each must be sealed and guarded to prevent their emergence." I thought of the pale, jointed limb I'd glimpsed in the mausoleum passage and shuddered. And Mrs. Richardson, Clara, was responsible for one of these gates? He nodded solemnly. "The most important one. The 7th gate. It can only be sealed by someone of her bloodline." His voice caught. "When she fell ill, we knew what would happen. She wasn't supposed to pass on until a new guardian was ready." "But she did," I said softly. "Yes. And they took her before the proper rites could be performed." His hands trembled slightly as he turned a page in the book. "She wasn't the first. Over the past year, 6 other deaths in Millhaven, all related to the guardian families. Too many to be coincidence. The 6 fresh mounds around the mausoleum." My stomach turned with sudden understanding. "Those aren't new graves," I whispered. "They're empty," he finished. Just like Clara's. The Hollow Ones have been planning this, Mr. Morris. Taking the Guardians one by one, weakening our defenses. With each unsealed gate, their influence grows stronger. A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. How did your wife fall ill, Mr. Richardson? His face darkened. She began having nightmares, sleepwalking. Then the fevers started. The doctors couldn't explain it. He closed his eyes briefly. I should have recognized the signs. It's all documented here. He tapped the book. When a gate begins to fail, its guardian weakens. And now they have 6 of the 7 guardians. 6 of the 7 keys. His gaze dropped to my closed fist. Yours is the last. Clara must have trusted you deeply to pass it to you in her final moments of freedom. Final moments. The implication chilled me. She's not free now. Richardson's expression was grim. What you saw last night wasn't my Clara. Not entirely. When they take someone, they hollow them out. Use what remains like a puppet. If she gave you the key, she was fighting their control, but it won't last. Outside, the morning had grown strangely dark. Dense clouds rolled in, unnatural in their speed and coloration, a sickly greenish-gray that cast an apocalyptic light over the cemetery. We're running out of time, Richardson said, rising abruptly. Tonight is the autumn equinox. The boundary between worlds grows thin. If all 7 gates are opened, they'll pour through by the thousands. What can we do? I asked, the key now burning hot against my palm. We must reseal the 7th gate before sundown. But we'll need help. He gathered up the book. There's a ritual. It requires 3 participants. The key bearer, he nodded to my hand, the blood descendant, he pointed to himself, and the witness. Who's the witness? Someone who's seen beyond the veil but remains untouched. Someone who can verify the sealing. He paused. Officer Callahan. Callahan. Why him? Because he saw inside Clara's empty casket but hasn't been taken. The Hollow Ones can only claim those who've had direct contact with the gates or been specially prepared, like the Guardians. Within the hour, we had convinced a skeptical Callahan to join us. The evidence was too compelling to ignore. 6 more empty graves discovered that morning, matching exactly the 6 Guardian families named in Richardson's book. The weather growing more ominous by the minute. And most convincingly, the discovery that each of the 6 taken had shown the same symptoms as Clara before their passing. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to near night. Wind howled through the cemetery, toppling fresh flower arrangements and rattling the iron gates. The 3 of us stood before the old mausoleum, Richardson reading instructions from the black book by flashlight. The ritual must be performed precisely, he shouted over the wind. Morris, you'll insert the key. I'll recite the binding words. Callahan, you must witness and confirm the gate is sealed. And if this doesn't work? Callahan asked, hand resting on his service weapon. Richardson's expression was grim. Then pray the other gates hold. As we approached the mausoleum, the iron gate swung open of its own accord. The blue light pulsed from within, stronger than before, casting our shadows long across the ground. Inside, the passage in the rear wall had widened considerably. The strange chittering sounds echoed from its depths, interspersed with what sounded like distant, tortured moans. Richardson directed us to stand in specific positions around the opening. He handed me a small copper bowl filled with what he called binding salt, a mixture of cemetery soil, crushed herbs, and what I suspected might be blood. When I give the signal, he instructed, place the key in the lock. What lock? I asked, seeing nothing but the yawning passage. You'll know. Richardson began chanting in a language I didn't recognize, words that seemed to twist in the air. The blue light pulsated in rhythm with his voice. As he spoke, the temperature plummeted until our breath clouded before us. From deep within the passage came a sound like rushing water. The chittering grew louder, more frantic. And then, emerging from the darkness, came Clara Richardson. Or what had once been Clara. Her form flickered between the woman I'd seen the previous night and something else. Something with too many limbs, moving in ways human joints shouldn't allow. Her head twitched unnaturally as she approached, water still trickling from her mouth. Behind her, more figures emerged, 6 others in burial clothes, moving with the same broken, puppet-like motions. I recognized several as recently departed Millhaven residents. "Now!" Richardson shouted, his voice strained. "The key, Morris! Use it now!" As Clara and the others advanced, something appeared in the center of the passage, a circular depression in the stone that hadn't been visible before. The symbol from the key glowed blue at its center. With shaking hands, I pressed the key into the depression. It sank in smoothly, then began to turn of its own accord. Clara and the others froze, their forms flickering more violently between human and other. Richardson's chanting reached a crescendo, and he sliced his palm with a small knife, pressing the bleeding wound against the wall beside the key. "Witness!" he cried to Callahan. "Do you see the gate? Do you acknowledge its sealing in the name of the living?" Callahan, white-faced but steady, stepped forward. "I see it. I acknowledge the sealing." I scattered the binding salt in a circle around the key as Richardson had instructed. The moment the circle was complete, a shock wave of force blasted outward, knocking us to the ground. The blue light flared blindingly bright, then vanished entirely. In its place, a solid stone wall now stood where the passage had been, the key and symbol no longer visible. Clara and the 6 others collapsed like marionettes with cut strings. For a moment, absolute silence filled the mausoleum. Then Clara's body shuddered once and grew still. Richardson crawled to his wife's side, cradling her head. Tears streamed down his face as he kissed her forehead. "Is it done?" Callahan asked hoarsely. "Are they gone?" "From this gate, yes," Richardson replied, not looking up. "But there are 6 others still open." "Then we seal those too," I said with determination I didn't know I possessed. Richardson shook his head sadly. "Without their guardians, it's impossible. The best we can do is reinforce the remaining barriers." He looked up at me, his eyes haunted. "This isn't over, Mr. Morris. It's merely postponed." In the days that followed, we worked tirelessly, using the Black Book's instructions to create wards and protections around the cemetery. The bodies of Clara and the other 6 were properly reburied with ancient rites Richardson found in the book's pages. The weather returned to normal, and Millhaven seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, unaware of how close it had come to annihilation. Officer Callahan, Richardson, and I formed an unlikely alliance, sworn to vigilance. We created a hidden chamber beneath my cabin where the Black Book could be studied and protected. Richardson began the painstaking process of identifying distant relatives of the guardian families who might someday take up the mantle. As for me, I continued my duties as caretaker, now with a deeper understanding of what I was truly guarding. I never again ventured near the old mausoleum after dark, though sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, I could swear I heard faint chittering noises emanating from beneath the soil in various points throughout the cemetery. The official case file for "The Body That Vanished" was closed as unsolved in December 1984. The authorities eventually labeled it as probable grave robbery, though no suspects were ever identified. But I know the truth. We sealed 1 gate, but 6 remain open. The hollow ones are patient. They've waited centuries. They can wait decades more. Sometimes, when the moon is full and the autumn wind blows cold across the headstones, I see figures moving among the distant graves. figures that walk with jerky, puppet-like motions. They gather at the 6 points marked in the Black Book, as if testing their barriers, probing for weakness. And occasionally, I glimpse Clara Richardson among them, her eyes momentarily clearing as if fighting for control, looking toward my cabin with an expression of desperate warning. I've instructed that when my time comes, I'm to be cremated, my ashes scattered far from any cemetery. The key to being a good caretaker, you see, is understanding exactly what needs to be cared for, and what must be prevented at all costs. For beneath Millhaven Cemetery, they are always waiting, always listening, always scratching at the barriers between their world and ours. And the gates are weakening. From the personal journal of Elijah Morris, Cemetery Caretaker. Millhaven, October 31, 1987. Note: this journal was discovered in 2022 during the demolition of the old caretaker's cabin at Millhaven Cemetery. The Black Book referenced was never found. Construction at the site was halted after workers reported unusual sounds coming from beneath the old mausoleum, which was scheduled for restoration. 6 workers subsequently vanished without explanation. The project remains indefinitely suspended.